Hey everyone. I wanted to speak candidly about the Metro UI documentary that I had planned on making. I teased it, I don't know, a year or so ago, and honestly, I don't know if I'll have the bandwidth to do it. Several reasons for that. The main one is just, time spent doing other things that are higher priority. It's a story I desperately want to tell. So I think the goal of this video is just going to be to kind of look at the outline that I did develop, talk a bit about the background on why I'm wanting to make this and the story that I kind of want to tell, give you a glimpse for what could have been or maybe what will be in the future. I'm not saying I will never make this video, but I need something of it to be out there already. So let's switch to that script. So here's what I have so far of it. This is just an outline, so it's not an actual script yet. Um, but the idea was it would be called something like Metro UI, the design language that changed everything. For those of you that are not aware, Metro UI is the name of the design language that Microsoft used and was popularized through Windows Phone and then Windows 8. The live tiles, the sort of flat design. And I'm going to argue in this documentary, if it ever is made, that it went on to influence the flat trend that didn't just span the technology industry, but kind of design as a whole for a good while there before Microsoft switched to the Fluent design language in 2017 or so. So all that to say, I had a few other ideas for a byline, the design language that transformed an industry, Glance and Go, how a new design language changed everything. Glance and Go was the name of a podcast that covered Microsoft Windows Phone stuff. Um, I'm not sure. Oh yeah, so these are just some of my other ideas about topics I wanted to cover, and then this quote, I wanted this to kind of open in sort of a surreal way, and I wanted this quote to just be on the screen. The advance of technology is based on making it fit in, so that you don't even really notice it, so it's part of everyday life, and then Bill Gates would appear. And that would kind of be the beginning. And so the in medias res, to use the Latin term, in the middle of things, the launch off point was just here's Microsoft, this pretty successful tech company, but it was hardly considered a design focused company. And this is the story of how that changed. So the way that I would organize it is around the 5 principles of Metro, and each of those principles would kind of explain how it developed. In its earliest origins, Metro's origins was the content not Chrome, or what's known as the do more with less design principle from Metro. It became kind of affectionately known as content over Chrome. And so it really started with Microsoft Encarta 1995 from the mind of Bill Flora, a designer who's been with Microsoft on and off. What was with them for a time is no longer, but his idea was making content sort of the hero of the story. So really popular stuff that would happen at the time is you kind of have flashy buttons and overly complex user interfaces because those were kind of new and hot in the 90s. Well, his thought was, well, let's return to the essence. What's really important here was the content. So the content should be the hero of the story. So Encarta Deluxe 2001 even had some examples of live tiles, which was really all about getting at a glance information that was sort of graphical, gave you just exactly what you needed to know before you dug in further to get more details. Then I would say the next principle to talk about is being fast and fluid, and this had to do with using typography, using motion, and conveying information through that in sort of an intuitive way. And that's where the Sega UI typography really started to take off, the default font typeface of Windows. There were some legal troubles there, which I would have gone into a bit in the documentary. And then the third one is being digitally authentic, and that's where Zune comes in. So one of the key reasons I kind of include Zune here is it was dark mode by default, and that's digitally authentic in the sense that it acknowledges of this, when it comes to screens, it's actually better to have a black background so that anything that's emitted through light can be seen more clearly. And so, especially with the Zune HD, that was with the OLED screen, one of the first devices to have OLED in 2009. And Zago UI was sort of an offshoot typeface of Sega UI. And that's when a Zune phone came in, which became the Microsoft Kin. It was the kind of the predecessor to Windows Phone in 2010. It was only ever on the market for 48 days, so a pretty big flop, unfortunately. But it had all the pieces of what would end up being kind of the flagship Metro experience. And another thing that it got right was this social media focus, this always cloud connected focus, where you had your stuff stored in the cloud. That was sort of, a new idea back then, and being social focused was another part of it. And that's what being authentically digital is. It's recognizing that, this is a digital device. It's not anything else other than that. So then we have, I think I numbered these wrong. This should be 4. This should be 5. So then for the next one, showing pride and craftsmanship. That's where Windows Phone comes in. This is, we need to respond to iPhone and Android at Microsoft. So let's create a SWAT team that was just focused on this. And so there was a lot of internal momentum at this point for Metro because it had been evolving in the couple decades past to be what it is now. And at this point, Microsoft as a whole was really taking notice. And this is when the designers really leaned fully into it. You can see that with Windows Phone's live tiles, the focus on motion and typography, kind of wrapping in everything up till this point into one user interface. And that's where the sort of win is one principle comes in. The idea is if you have uniformity and consistency across different, shall you say, input methods or convergence across different form factors, you can really build that consistent user experience, and you can have sort of intuitive usage of your applications and your software. Well, that's where Windows 8 and Xbox and Office and OneDrive and Bing all kind of changing their design to fit the Metro design. However, this is sort of where things fell apart. Ironically, when things were kind of coming together, they did a whole rebrand where Microsoft changed their logo for the first time in years. That has those those squares or what have you, and that was definitely Metro inspired. And this is still the logo they use now. But one of the issues with implementing Metro to some of these other platforms was, rather than starting with the principles that made Metro so great to start with, they simply looked at Windows Phone and said, how can we make our other products look like Windows Phone, instead of taking the core principles that brought about the Windows Phone interface of Metro and just applying it to those different form factors. So thinking about Metro for desktop, thinking about Metro for Xbox, it was more, let's copy what's working really well on the phone and just kind of scale it up for desktop. Let's tweak it for TV, for Xbox, or whatever. So I don't think, and the negative reception to Windows 8, I think, was indicative of that issue. They didn't take the core principles. They took sort of everything after the core principles were applied on one platform and tried to apply it to another one. That's where we have the influence of it. So at this point, Apple and Google have responded with iOS 7 in 2013, the Mac OS update Yosemite in 2014, as well as Google's material design and more cohesion between the Google web products and Android. Before 2014, there was a stark difference between Android look and feel and kind of the Google product look and feel that were like web-based, or even Chrome or something like that. 2014, they brought together, and the flat design of iOS 7 and material design was absolutely a response to Microsoft's Metro UI. Now, kind of how would I have tied up the documentary? Well, obviously, we've kind of moved past the flat design trend, but really Metro is a lot more than just flat design. It ended up having a flat design in the way it was implemented, but it, the way that it was digested was a flat design sort of aesthetic. And so one of the things that happened out of that was you'll notice a progressive subtraction of major brands' marks and designs. So the critique of like the progressively simplified logo that lacks personality and all that, that was sort of an extremism reaction, I think, to what was happening in the broader tech sphere. And I think that's taking the wrong lesson from it. Then we have, of course, Microsoft's Fluent design in 2017, which had things like depth and more gradients it kind of returned some of the things that were considered distractions or Chrome, to go back to the earlier example of doing more with less. So anyway, I would have talked about that a little bit. I would have talked about kind of this return to Fruitigo Arrow and like with Apple's Glass stuff for iOS, how we've got kind of gone full circle back to kind of the prevalence of Chrome, and I think it's just funny to see the full cyclical cycle of design trends. So anyway, I feel very strongly about Metro. I think it's a great design language. I think it could have been evolved. I think it could have evolved and persisted to this day. In some ways, Fluent is that. In some ways, Fluent is a departure from Metro. But anyhow, I think it's a great story, and I lived this. I remember Media Center in 2002. I remember seeing Zune, and I actually bought a Zune, and I loved it. And that's what got me interested in Windows Phone. That's what got me interested in what Microsoft was doing. And then by the time they had Windows 10 Mobile and they had, Windows 8.1, it was kind of like falling apart. It wasn't quite what they had. I think they could have done more with it. But anyhow, that is what I wanted to make. Of course, it's not everyone's cup of tea. Not everyone's interested in it. I certainly am and certainly was. I had a series of interviews with a lot of the designers that worked on these concepts, these products, and I had a lot of proprietary, really interesting footage, concept videos, design documents that I maybe would have showcased that it would help tell this story. Unfortunately, some of them are current Microsoft employees who I interviewed, some of them are former Microsoft employees. I don't really want to get anybody in trouble. So that was another thing that kind of kept me back from really leaning into this and telling the story more was, I didn't want to give away enough information to where someone would get in trouble legally or something like that. Which was honestly a problem even making the Melee documentary, the Melee development one, where, I tried to reach out to HAL Laboratory, and they did get back to me, but they were very strict about saying, hey, on the record, we can't, anyone that's worked with us can't speak to you for the purpose of an interview. We don't do that. Please direct all your, questions to Nintendo of America. And unfortunately, they would not really let me talk with them. Well, Microsoft was a lot more open when I talked to them, but I know there's still sensitivity around things like trade secrets or, anything that's under NDA. So I want to be really sensitive of that. And so I think with that in mind, if I don't get a really clear green light, go forward with this, I think I'd rather err on the side of safety and, not necessarily put anybody in jeopardy. So, all that to say, thank you for letting me get this off my chest. I know maybe not a ton of you would be super interested in it, but I needed to share it nonetheless. So, thank you very much, and I'll catch you on the next one.